All right, let's see. Let me know if y'all can hear me. Put 1 in the chat if y'all can hear me. Let me know if y'all can hear me. On YouTube and Facebook, type in 1 if y'all can hear me. Why did that crazy stuff? Okay, y'all can hear me on Facebook. All right, everybody can hear me on YouTube and on Facebook. Type in 1 if you can hear me on YouTube and on Facebook. Let me know. Alright, think I'm back up again. Alright, we're going to go back where we left off. So we're on John chapter 18 verse 10. Alright, we're on John chapter 18 verse 10. So to give you a backdrop, right? This is during, okay. So this is during the time that Judas betrayed Christ. He betrayed Christ. Judas was not a brother. Right? Judas was not the solid brother that he was. He wasn't solid. Judas betrayed Christ. Right? And so there were men looking for Christ. Because it was time for Christ to go. They were looking for Christ. Right? So now, there was a captain, right? You had the band and the captain looking for Christ, and some officers looking for Christ. And so this is something that Peter did, right? That the Christian church may not want to teach you. All right. So this is something that Peter did. All right. This is something that Peter did. John chapter 18 verse 10. Then Simon Peter, having a sword. So first things first. Peter had a sword. Why would Peter have a sword? Can somebody tell me that? Why would Peter have a sword? If God was all love and Christ was all about love, why would one of his servants have a sword? Can anyone answer that question? Why would he have a sword if Christ was all about love? If Christ was all about dying for everybody and loving everybody and hugs and kisses and rainbows for everybody, why did Peter, his main man, right, his friend, his disciple, his brother, right, why did he have a sword? Well, here's why. Because to be a priest, a prophet of the Lord, to be a follower of Christ as a man, you have to be a soldier. A soldier carries swords. You understand? A warrior carries a sword. You understand? Right. He was carrying it for the ox. That's why he was carrying it. Because he was carrying it for the ox. He was carrying it for his enemies. That's why Peter had a sword. It was for his protection. Right? That's why Peter had a sword. Alright? Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it. So Peter didn't just have a sword, he also drew the sword. So imagine this, my teacher stick being a sword. He had a sword, and he drew his sword. Everybody knows how to draw a sword, right? Think about it back in the day in medieval times or ancient times. You would take it out of the sheath, and you would draw the sword, right? Now, to draw a sword, you got to be very strong. I don't know if anyone has ever carried a sword, but I remember when I was younger, I tried to pick up a sword, and I mean a real sword. I was like, oh my God! Like I was shaking when I was a kid. I was shaking. It wasn't until when I was a teenager and I had a little bit of muscles on my bone. When I tried to pick up a sword again, I was able to hold it for a few more moments and minutes later, right? I mean longer. Then I started shaking again, right? Because obviously I'm not trained to wield a sword and hold a sword, because it takes strength to hold a sword, right? And to maneuver a sword as fast as it needs to be, even with one hand. That takes strength. That takes skill. That takes precision. That takes training to wield and draw a sword. You can't just draw a sword and just be okay with it. You got to be trained to do that, right? So Peter drew his sword, meaning Peter was trained how to use a sword. Once again, why would Peter be trained to use a sword if Christ was all about love? Peter was a follower of Christ. So why was he trained on a sword if God was all about love and Christ was all about love? But don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We'll get to it. A sword drew it and smote the high priest's servant. And smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. So he drew the sword, and then he also smote and cut off the servant's right ear. So he took a sword. You see this? This is my right ear. It might look like your left ear to me, right? It might look like your left ear to you, but this is my right ear, close to my body, right? So without killing this man, right? So without killing this man, Peter drew a sword and cut off that man's right ear. That takes precision, that takes skill, that's what it takes. And cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Was Malchus. That was that servant's name. Like this man, Peter cut off a man's ear with a sword. Once again, these men are not weak, man. The men of the Lord were never weak. And Christ and Peter was protecting Christ. Because those servants were after Christ. And Peter protected Christ with a sword. You understand? Peter protected his brother. You understand? Peter protected his Adawan, protected his Lord, protected his king. Peter understood that he needed to protect his king at that time. He said, you know what? These are the odds. And it seems like this is a dangerous and hostile situation. Let me draw my sword and I'm gonna just cut this man's ear off to be like, hey yo, you getting too close. I don't know what, you getting a little too grabby and touchy there. You fidgeting too much. What you doing, Doc? You know what I'm saying? The next time mentality you gotta have. You moving too much. What you doing, Doc? You know what I'm saying? What you doing? Back up. What you doing? Back up. Relax. What you doing? We just talking here. Why you trying to grab up my man? Why you trying to lay hold on my man's here? Why you trying to put hands on him? What you doing? Back up. You getting too close. That's the type of mentality we have for our brothers. This is the type of mentality we need for our nation. This is how we protect the nation of Israel. By having, as Black, Hispanic, and Native American men, by having a soldier's mentality. By having a warrior's mentality. By having order. By understanding what it means to be obedient. To understand what it means to be disciplined. This is something that we need. This is something that we have to have. This is something that has to happen, man. We just can't be out here BSing, man. We gotta understand that, alright? Let's get it. Let's get Numbers. No, it's like not Numbers. Let's get Nehemiah. Let's get Nehemiah chapter 8. Let's get Nehemiah chapter 8. And we're going to start at verse 3. We're going to get Nehemiah chapter 8. We're going to start at verse 3. Nehemiah chapter 8 verse 3. And he read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning until midday. So to give y'all context, this is talking about the priest Ezra. Alright? So this is talking about this right here in context is talking about the priest Ezra, alright? Ezra the priest. Alright, and he was a scribe. Alright? And this was during the time of the Persian Empire, when we were under the captivity of the Persian and Medes captivity. All right. So like Ezra and Nehemiah, right? Nehemiah was a governor, while Ezra was the priest and scribe. All right. And Nehemiah was prophet of the Lord too as well, but he was in a high position, just like how Ezra was the priest and scribe in a high position, right? And they were priests and prophets of the Lord. Salaki. And Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 3. And he read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning until midday. Because during the end of Ezra and during Nehemiah, they're trying to build Jerusalem back up. They're trying to build the nation of Israel back up because we've been destroyed. We've been serving other gods and serving idols and having sex with whores and smoking weed and getting high and just doing everything against the Most High. You know what I'm saying? So we got to build this city back up. Not just physically, right, but spiritually too. And this is how they're going to do it spiritually. Before the men and the women, Salaki, and those that could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive unto the book of the law. So during this time, right, they were reading out of the book of the law. What's the book of the law? This is talking about the law of Moses right here. This is the law of Moses right here. So they're reading the book of law to the brothers and sisters out there, right? Why would you think, now does anybody guess, let's give a good educated guess, why would you think it's important to go into the book of the law to teach to brothers and sisters? Why would you think it's important to open up the book of the law for these brothers and sisters? Why do you think it's important? And think about it. Think about today's lesson. Why would it be important to open up the book of the law in the middle of the city, by the water gate, in the streets, to these brothers and to these sisters? Why do we think it's important to do this and to do that? Why do we think this would be important to do? Open up the book of the law. Give the brother a hand. That's correct. So they can learn how to protect each other. That's why. Because the law is what's going to protect us. The law is going to protect so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. That's what the law is going to do. The law is going to protect blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. Not eating pork will protect us. You understand? Not eating shrimp and lobster will protect us. Not being a homosexual will protect us. Not being a lesbian will protect us. Not serving other gods will protect us. Not being a whore will protect us. Not being a whoremonger and pimp and selling our women out to be whores will protect us. Not being a drug dealer, being a witch will protect us. You understand? These are things that will protect the black, Hispanic, and Native American community. This is something that needs to be understood. That's the reason why we're in the book of the law. Just like right now, we would go to the book of the law. Now remember, they're outside. Ezra right now is outside. Before the streets. Before the water gate. They're outside. It says from morning until midday. From the morning until midday. So they're out there from the morning until midday. What's midday? Midday is around what? Morning from midday. Midday is like when the day is about to be over. Like before sunset. Right? Midday. A few hours or a couple hours to a few hours before sunset. That's midday. Verse 4. And Ezra the scribe stood upon a pulpit of wood. And it said, and Ezra the scribe, because Ezra was a scribe and a priest. A scribe is someone that takes record of everything. That's what a scribe does. A scribe takes account of everything that's going on. That's the purpose of a scribe. So if you have a position of a scribe, that's a very important position to have, because you're responsible for taking account of everything. So you have to be diligent and vigilant and very disciplined. And Ezra the scribe stood upon a pulpit of wood. Anybody know what a pulpit of wood is? What does that sound like to you? Right now, Ezra is outside on a pulpit of wood, right? Which they had made for the purpose, meaning they made this pulpit of wood. They made this pulpit of wood. What does it sound like to you? A pulpit is a platform, an elevated platform, right? So this elevated platform is made out of wood, which they made for this purpose, meaning these priests, right? These brothers, right? Ezra made this pulpit of wood for a reason, to go outside in the streets to teach the book of the law. What does that sound like? Anybody online, what does that sound like to you? I'm going to continue reading, but answer the question. What does it sound like to you? What does it sound like to you? Does it sound familiar to you? I know it sounds familiar to me. And beside him stood. So beside him, meaning next to him, right? By the side of him, right? And beside him stood Mattithiah and Shema and Ananiah and Uriah and Hilkiah and Maaseiah on his right hand. So on his right hand there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 brothers. So on his right hand there were 6 brothers. You had Mattithiah, Shema, Ananiah, Uriah, Hilkiah, and Maaseiah. So there were 6 brothers on the side. And on his left had Pedaiah, Mishael, Malchiah, Hashum, Hasbadana, Zechariah, and Meshullam. So it was 5 to 6 on his right and 7 on his left. Right? And so what does it sound like to y'all when Isupk is on the streets? Street speaking. God. Whoever said sounds like camp, right? Street preaching, the Isupk on the streets, along those lines, that's exactly what it is. This is how you protect your brother. This is how you also protect your brothers. This is also how you protect your sisters out here. This is brotherhood. To go out on the street and you purposely build a pulpit of wood, a elevated piece of wood, so you can go out in the streets and teach your brothers and sisters how to be protected and how to keep the laws of God. That's love. So when we go out to camp, just know that's love. When we go out and teach our brothers and sisters the law, that's love. That's in the Bible right here. Ezra did it. During the times of Nehemiah, Ezra did it. Mattithiah did it. Shema did it. Ananiah did it. Uriah did it. Hilkiah did it. Maaseiah did it. Right? Pedaiah did it. Mishael did it. Malchiah did it. Hashum did it. Hasbadana did it. Zechariah did it. Meshullam did it. So why wouldn't we? You thought we just made it up? You thought we just made this up? Shalom, shalom. If you have any questions, put into the live chat. Alright? That's no sweat. Put into the live chat if you have any questions, alright? Alright? So everybody understands, right? This is how you protect your brother. This is 1 West in the Bible right here. This is 1 West in the Bible right here. Okay? It says you read a passage in Exodus 21 last night, and I had a chance to read the whole chapter today. Okay, no sweat. Okay, no sweat. You was able to read the chapter. That's good. What is your question? Hey, warrior, come here. Warrior, Hadazan, come here. Expeditiously. What's going on? All right, sit down. All right, and be careful. All right. All right. You said the so-called white man split up families, but I read a verse that said after 7 years, the man goes free. But if the slave master gave him a wife, the wife stays with the master. Okay. Where in the Bible does it say the word slave? What version of the Bible are you reading, by the way? Yeah, I'll clarify it for you. No sweat, no sweat. What version of the Bible are you reading from? All right. Where does it say slave? Where does it say slave? What version Bible are you reading? What version Bible are you reading? If you can answer. So, because I'll clarify for you to give you some understanding. So, what version of the Bible are you reading? It says, I think King James might say servant, and NIV says slave. Okay. So if you did not know, the NIV, what is that called? The New International Version, right? The NIV is not something you should be reading from. The NIV was written in 1978. All right. The NIV Bible itself has scriptures taken out from the King James Version Bible. So you have the King James Version Bible, but the NIV has scriptures, doesn't have scriptures that the King James Version has, because the NIV was published in 1978 and was written around that time, and they took scriptures out of the King James Version Bible. So you don't want to trust the NIV to begin with, because there's a clear difference between a servant and a slave. Am I correct? Right? There's a big difference between a servant and a slave, right? Right, Sterling? There is a difference between a servant and a slave, right? There's a big difference, right? So your question was, you said the so-called white man split up families, but I read a verse that said after 7 years, the man goes free. But if the slave master gave him a wife, the wife stays with the master. All right? Okay, so what's the difference between a slave, servant, and bondsman? Well, first thing first, when you are a servant, right, you are serving. All right? A servant, meaning you are willingly serving. Let's get the definition of servant. Literally, the definition of servant is one that serves, right? Someone that just serves. Let's get the definition of slave. A person held in forced servitude. A slave is someone that's forced. That's held in forced servitude. A servant is not forced to serve, but a slave is. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Is a servant free to quit? Is a servant free to quit? Okay. Do you know anything about America's military, sir? Right? Is a servant free to quit? Are you familiar with the rules of America's military? When you serve in America's military and they say thank you for your service, can you just quit? Yes or no? Right, that's true. Ayan, that's true. What about you, Sterling? If you serve in America's military, right? And they say thank you for your service, can you just quit? In the military you could face penalties, but I'm not sure what they are. No problem. Let me go back to Exodus 21 to give you some clarity. A servant, it says, all right. I'm gonna go to Exodus chapter 21 verse 2. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, how do you buy a Hebrew servant? How do you buy it? This is not slavery. I just want to let you know this is not slavery, Sterling. This has nothing to do with slavery. It has nothing to do with slavery. This deals with servitude. This deals with serving, not servitude. This deals with in an act of serving, right? Meaning if thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. How do you buy a Hebrew servant? You're not buying a slave, right? You're not buying a slave. You're not forcing this person to work. So how would you buy a Hebrew servant, right? You're not buying a slave, forcing him to work, right? Because you don't have to buy him. You're just paying for him, then you're making him work. You're not forcing him to work at this time. So how would you buy a Hebrew servant? A Hebrew servant. How would you buy a Hebrew servant? Okay. This is what the scripture is talking about, Sterling. This is setting up a contract. When you buy something, this is not talking about slavery. When you buy something, this is dealing with a contract being made. Right? This is like a contract being made of certain, like when you go into the military and you serve, there's a contract. And there's a way to get out of that contract, and the only way to get out of that contract is to buy that contract out. Because there's a certain amount of money that they pay you, by the way, right? And there's a certain amount of money you have to make in order for them to say, okay, you did your time here, you're good to go. All right? It has nothing to do with slavery. All right? This is all about how to build a nation. So we, right here in context in the Exodus, we're just coming out of Egypt. And we're about to come into a land, right, that we've never been before. So we're learning in a way how to establish our land. And how to establish our cities, our towns, our communities. And you need workers in order to, right, you need workers. You need servants in order to build up buildings and towns and houses and etc., etc. You need servants to do it, right? You need servants. So how would you get these servants? You would buy them. You would give them a time of work, and you work this time, and then once you're done with this time, then you're good to go. But there's stipulations if you want to stay or not, and things like that, etc., etc. This is just how the nation of Israel operated. This is not about slavery. This has nothing to do with us taking men out of their own land and raping them and molesting them and forcing them to work against their will. This has nothing to do with that. Does that answer your question, Sterling? Okay, no sweat. Just remember, that has nothing to do with slavery. It deals with setting up a nation. This is about occupations and work and setting up ways to serve. All right. These people that were serving, these Hebrew servants, they had homes to live in. They had wives. They had families. They had places to stay. They weren't being raped or molested. They weren't being sex trafficked. They weren't being lynched. None of that was happening to them because they were Hebrews. They were Israelites. They were of our own people. And God forbids us to do that to our own nation and us race of people. God forbids that. That's why when you go down to verse 16, it says in verse 21, verse 16, not verse 16, Salaki. Not verse 16. Or maybe I am right, Salaki. Right, and when you drop down to verse 16, when it says, he that stealeth a man, the reason why the Lord put that there to let you know for sure, this verse 21, this chapter, Exodus 21, is not talking about slavery. Right? That's why in verse 16, that's why it's there. In Exodus 21, verse 16, because for sure this is not talking about slavery. Right? When we, that's also as well, that NIV, throw it out today. Burn it. Alright? If you have a paper book of it, I want you to send a photo, alright, to the UPK of you burning the NIV. Read the King James Version Bible. Alright? It says, could you beat your servant with a rod as long as they don't die in a day or two? La'ah. Alright? La'ah. Let's go to verse, that was in verse 20. Verse 20. Let's go to verse, we have to go up to, okay, no sweat. Okay. In order to understand that scripture, you got to go up to verse 18. And if men strive together, and one smite another with a stone, or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed. So, this right here is talking about a man and a man having quarrels with each other. They're having disagreements with each other, and they're fighting each other. Alright? Verse 19. If he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit. Only he shall pay for the loss of his time, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. So the Lord is saying, right? If he's good to go and he's all right, the only thing that needs to be paid for is his time, because you're the one that messed him up. All right. And you're the one that caused him to be healed, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. Meaning you're going to pay for his wounds. You're going to pay for that, because y'all had a quarrel, and you hit him and you beat him up real bad. You're going to pay for his damages, right? As long as he's not smoted and dead. Verse 20: If a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be surely punished. So if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall surely be punished. So if you're a man and you smite your servant, meaning you get a correlation with your servant, and you get into a quarrel with your maid, and you take a rod and you hit him to the point of death, and you beat him up to the point of death, right? Right? I mean, if you, and you don't, right, and you beat him up to death, you get punished for that. Which tells you what? That answers your question, right? You cannot beat your servant with a rod. You cannot kill your servant. You cannot murder your servant. You can't kill anyone in Israel. You can't murder anyone in Israel. Verse 21, notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is money. So now, if he doesn't die, right, meaning there's no consequence, right? The only consequence that would be, right, is what? You would pay for that time. And you would pay for his damages. You understand? Yes or no, Sterling? That's why you had to go to verse 18. Oh yeah, that's no sweat. That's no sweat, Sterling. Ask all the questions. Ask all the questions that you want. It's all right. It's all right. All right. Just know that this is all about brotherhood back here. All about sisterhood back here. All right. Ain't no sweat to it. All right. With that, we're kind of over time. So Salakia. All right. With that, Amadium, which means to stand. Men of Israel, we're going to give a courteous salute to the brothers. Men of Israel, Amadium Shabbat, Amadium, Barak, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua B'Kathah, Yadim Matah, Saul Akwafim, which means turn and face the sisters. Men of Israel, we're going to give a courteous salute to the sisters. Men of Israel, Amadium Shabbat, Amadium, Barak, Yahweh Shema Al-Athan Ba'ashem Yahushua, Yadim Matah. With that, class dismissed.